Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. Well, how many developers in the room, out of curiosity? Raise them high. Developers are like, I'm not going to raise my hands. I'm a developer. Okay, good. So we're going to talk about sales for developers, which I know is like the worst thing. You don't want to waste your time here. That's for the pointy-haired marketing types to deal with. But hopefully, if this has ever happened to you, you might understand why what I'm going to be talking about, which is if you've ever put up a GitHub project and you only got 1 star, okay, like this is Twig email templates for Magento. I thought it was a good idea, but I didn't get much traction. So if you've ever put something out, whether it's, I'm going to talk about building a product. I have a product that I launched that was acquired recently, and if you've ever done open source, or even if you're just trying to sort of sell yourself within your company, there's some important keys here that I want to talk about. It's on the next slide here. Oh, let me back up. When you put something out, even if you're putting out open source, you have to be able to promote it. You have to talk to people about it. You have to put content out and get people excited about it. If you've ever launched something to just crickets, and as a developer, your mindset is, hey, if I build it, they'll come, right? But I know so many people, they've tried that, whether it's building a little product on the side, doing something open source, and you don't get the response you want. It can be very discouraging. And a lot of people just give up there. And I think a lot of times you think, well, if it's good enough, it'll grow organically. I don't need to sell it and promote it and BS it and stuff like that. But the truth, like at least in my opinion, that's the exception, not the rule. That somebody builds, fart app or something like that, and it grows organic overnight. That's the exception. The rule is, even if you're building something that is awesome, that's amazing, that there's really a need for, you got to get out there. You got to talk to people about it. You got to promote it to build traction. So I'd love for you guys to get your questions ready. Hopefully you're not fully asleep yet, but I'd love to get questions, whether it's about my experience. I'm talking about my experience building a product called Magento. You can ask me about my background, my experience. If you have a product that you're building and you have any questions about how to promote it, what are the best ways to promote it, to market it, how to get traction in the Magento space, I'd love to help with that, or pretty much anything. So please get your questions ready. The talk's going to be short and sweet, like 20 minutes, and then I want to get a good 10 minutes of Q&A. So this is a little bit about my background. Got into Magento 2011, worked for Sweet Tooth, which is a loyalty platform, in 2012. Went in-house with a merchant in 2013. And then I started Magemail on the side while I was working in-house with a merchant. And one of the things that I think worked well is that the screen's down here too. That works really nicely. So one of the things that, and you may want to try this as well if you're in-house with a company and you're building a product, is to see if you can get them as your first customer, kind of your customer zero, and see if you can get them to pay for it, because then it hits a bunch of birds with one stone. You have your first customer, paying customer, and the stuff that you're building is going to benefit them as well. You sometimes need to have a conversation about, hey, are you doing this on your time? Are you doing it on company time? Make sure the expectations are clear. But that can be a great strategy to get something off the ground. It has benefits to both people, but it's tough because then you're building something nights and weekends. Your wife's constantly pissed at you because you're working all the time, so you got to work some of those things out. You guys are so quiet. Okay. Then I launched a podcast with a good friend of mine, Philip Jackson, in 2014. I'm going to talk a little bit about content, types of content, finding the type of content that works for you. I have a face for radio, so that worked well for me. And then I was able to go full-time on Magemail January 2015, which was very exciting. We announced that 17 times on the podcast. And then Magento was acquired in 2016. Why did I keep looking up there? I should look here. The new CEO is here, Eric Bullen, if you haven't met him yet. Great guy. They've got some exciting features that they're working on. I'm still on board as kind of an evangelist for the product. But I also started Commerce Hero in 2016, which is my current jam. It's like a hiring platform. So talk to me later about that. Here's some of the open source stuff I've done. I'm at the unfortunate stage in my career where people say, "Are you a developer? Who builds your Commerce Hero thing?" And I'm like, "I build it. I'm a developer. Damn it." So here's some of the open source stuff I've done. Custom reports, also known as risky reports, lets you create reports in the Magento backend off of SQL queries. It's kind of hard to read, though. Mage-run add-ons was an add-on for N98 Mage-run. Really liked. And by the way, part of the reason I'm going through all this is one of the things I think is important as somebody, if you're creating a product or you want to create something or do something other than freelance work or whatever, is just keep creating, keep building stuff. And whether that's, I have a tendency to launch a bunch of different stuff. That's one strategy. Sometimes I could be like a chicken with my head cut off. Whether you're iterating on one product or you're starting a bunch of different things, just keep creating. It can be, again, it can be discouraging. You put something out there, you get the 1 star, but you just got to keep doing it. So, there's the custom reports, the Mage-run add-ons. There's this thing called Mage Hero, which is the precursor to Commerce Hero that was a little weird. Split testing extension, Elasticsearch. So a bunch of different stuff I did, and I think it's important to keep creating. So this is my first commit of MageMail, Wednesday, May 22nd. Little known fact, it was originally called Auto Email. And it's fun to look back when you've done something, kind of retrace the steps. But the key that I want to get to here is just launch, right? Sometimes I talk to people and they say, "Well, I'm building this thing, but it's not perfect yet. Like, I have to perfect it before I put it out there." And I think it's important to just launch. You just got to get something out there. There's a little product you may have heard of called Magento 2, which may have had some struggles in this area. Tough crowd. But I think it's important. You got to get something out there, and then you're going to get feedback on it, and that's going to help you to iterate on it. So, my approach has always been put something out there. I think it was Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, that said, if you're not embarrassed of your first version, you didn't launch soon enough. So if you have something you're working on, you're going to be embarrassed of that first version. Put it out there. You'll get feedback. Incorporate the feedback and continue to improve. Is there any water up here? Okay, so I want to show you guys my revenue, kind of the revenue graph for MageMail. This is the first 14 months or so. And the reason I'm showing you this is to show you that early stage of building a product where everything basically sucks. It's very flat. The next slide we'll see looks a lot more interesting. We get to multiple six-figure revenue, that kind of thing. But this is where I think you make or break the product that you're launching. Especially as a developer. If this was a crowd that was into sales and marketing, these are things that you already know. I think, and I'm in a very different position now than I was back here, where I didn't have the experience of growing a company and marketing and those types of things. And so this is the kind of thing to expect. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they're building kind of a productized service. And I said, it's an interesting thing. I think there's a product market fit there. And I said, so how's it going? They said, well, have a few paying customers. It's been a few months. I was like, great, that's it. Like, it's happening. That's perfect. They're like, no, I don't think there's any traction. I'm going to stop doing it. And I think that happens all the time. I think we give up too soon. And there's a phrase called the long, slow SaaS ramp of death, which is this initial ramp. As developers, a lot of us have done freelance or contract work, or we've been employed in-house. And we're used to getting paid a good amount of money for each hour that we're spending. So when you're launching a product, it's tough. It's tough to be spending hours and hours every single night, and you're just making a couple $100 for it. So it's really tough to do that, but you gotta stick with it. So here's where things start to get fun, and things start to ramp up. And I want to talk about a couple of the lessons I learned about that point where you see an inflection point in the graph. I've talked about some of those already. Get on the phone is also, I think, a key thing. As human beings, we hate getting on the phone. It's like, hey, text me, send me a WeChat, send me a Slack. We hate to get on the phone. Even more so as developers, we really hate to get on the phone. One of the things where I identified that kind of inflection point was when I started to reach out to like all the warm contacts I have and to just get on the phone. Like, hey, I'd love to talk with you for 10 minutes whenever you have time to let you know about the thing I'm building. And it sounds really simple, and it is simple, but it's hard. Sometimes the simple things are hard. So I started to do that. There's a lot of important things that you learn, especially as you're building a product that's in the early stages. You don't really have product market fit yet, right? So you're trying to reach that. So you get great feedback. And when you're in the early stage of the product, you don't really have enough. I mean, we'd love to be able to do everything through Google Analytics and Optimizely and that kind of a thing. And when you're at later stages, you have enough traffic, that can work better. But when you're early stage, you don't have enough data for it to really make sense. And the qualitative feedback that you get over the phone is really key. It's also a sales strategy. So you're talking to somebody. You're not hard pitching them. You're just saying, hey, I'd love some feedback on this product. And they're kind of talking with you about it. They're kind of thinking through it. And now you're kind of top of mind for them. So the next time they're talking to somebody, they'll refer somebody to you. So getting on the phone is key. And then just put stuff out there. So I'm going to talk about a few different types of content you can put out. For myself, I have been into Twitter, and it's something that kind of works for me. I put stuff out a few times a day. I'll put out if I'm thinking about something. If I launch a feature, I'll put out a screenshot. If I have a question, I'll put something out there. And it's a format that works for me. But I'll talk a little bit about some of the other types of content that you can do. But I think, again, going back to create something every day and put something out there every day. It's a great way not only to connect with people, but to let people see your product, to let people see, because I think another thing that we think as developers is, hey, I already built it, I already tweeted it once, everybody should know about it. But it's not that simple. Like, you've got to slowly, incrementally over time, communicate it to people that you know, and that's where things start to pick up. So find the channel you love. So type of content. Like I mentioned, Twitter. Talk a little bit about GitHub. I think a great opportunity now, if you are picking up, maybe you want to learn Magento 2. I was talking to somebody earlier that was wanting to learn Magento 2. Maybe you're already into it. Start hitting those issues every day. I mean, imagine if you did a pull request every day for 365 days or something like that. You're learning Magento 2, and you're also kind of building. Then when you do a pull request, share it out, tweet it out, whatever, you're starting to build authority as the person that knows what they're doing in that space. Meetups, obviously, we're here. So you guys all have some relationships, some contacts just from being here. I think YouTube is interesting. If you're one of the millennials and you know how to do the videos, I think that there's some interesting stuff that you could do on YouTube. Blogging, I really wish I was better at blogging. I'm horrible at it. Like, when I see people, I'm thinking about Lewis here in the audience, I see people that can do long-form, in-depth content. To me, that's really impressive. You're going to get great organic traffic from it. You're going to really build authority. That's just not something I'm very good at, So that's something I'm jealous of people that are, but I think you have to find something that you love, something that works for you. LinkedIn, I thought everybody stopped using LinkedIn in like 2011. Little did I know, LinkedIn is really active. There's a lot of biz dev going on there. The podcast, we started. Phil has gone on to launch 75 other podcasts. But that's a format that's worked for us. For me, it's easier to just have a conversation for an hour about what you've been working on for the last week, because your mind's in it, your head's in it. versus sitting down to write a long article, right? Contributing to the core, I think, is huge. I think that Magento is doing an amazing job of encouraging core contributions. And I think in the past, they really didn't do such a great job. I mean, you could contribute something, and you wouldn't get any attribution, any recognition. You had to like fight just to get some recognition. But now there's the leaderboards, there's the point system with partner, all this stuff. So I think it's a really good time to be doing that. And then, of course, there's the partnership channels, which I don't know a whole lot about, but apparently those work. Now, you may say, like, hey, you know what? I'm not really interested in building a product. Like, I'm mostly focused on my day job, my career. I think that the continuity within this topic is it really comes down to selling yourself, right? So whether maybe you want to grow your role at your company, maybe you want to raise, maybe you want to improve some of the tools and processes that you're seeing used. I was talking to a guy that, their company didn't even do like source control, right? So maybe you want to get some cool continuous integration deployment in place or things like that. And I think that there's a tie into the content. If you're putting out content on a regular basis and kind of building your profile as an authority, number one, your employer is going to be more, you're going to have more say-so even with your employer because they're starting to see that you have some expertise on this topic. So it's going to give you a little bit more weight, even within the company, to affect change in areas that you're interested in. Obviously, it may help you with negotiating compensation, that kind of a thing. And I think for a lot of us, it's not really about money. It's more so is about the role that we have, the role we want to have. Maybe we're doing more kind of maintenance type work. We want to work on new builds. We want to work on new features, things like that. So, I think that's something where you want to be proactive, put together your own job description of what you want your role to be and present that to your company. So that's mostly what I want to get out. I hope I got it out. If you guys have any questions, I'd love to take them. If we can also cut it short, if you guys are very quiet today, so hope you enjoyed that. I'm not sure how the Q&A works. Yeah.
Thank you, Dalesh. What do you think the difference was in the one-star GitHub Twig email templates and say something like Mage Hero, which I know that you put a lot of effort in?
Yeah.
And then compare that with the reports module. What do you think the difference was in those three projects and how they became more or less successful for you, and what was your investment into those to make them successful?
Thanks. That's a really good question. I think that there was more of a need and an interest in the reporting when and that's kind of where when you're creating things, you're going to see different levels of interest. And sometimes you put something out, you think it's going to be amazing, and there's no feedback. Sometimes it surprises you. Sometimes it doesn't really match your intuition about how interesting something will be. But I think there was more interest in that. I worked on it at it was a need that, both of them were needs that I had for the merchant I was in-house with. But it was a need that I think other people had worked on it at a hackathon, and there was a bunch of other people that were into it. Started to get people involved in contributing to it and things like that. And as far as the amount of time, I probably put more time into the custom reports. It was also something that we use. It's funny, I don't even think I used the Twig email templates myself. I think it was kind of a trial thing and didn't really go anywhere. But yeah, so I used it more myself, put more time into it. There was more interest from people, worked on it at a hackathon. And so, yeah, I think that you're going to see that. You're going to put stuff out, and that's why I think you just got to keep putting stuff out, and then, stuff will start to pop. Yes, Brent. Oh, nice.
All kinds of custom SQL reports. How would you encourage people to become better managers? So I think that if they're going down the path of building their own feature or company or whatever, at some point they're going to have to become a manager. But also, as a developer, as a business owner, a developer at some point needs to lead other developers.
Yeah.
How would you go about encouraging them
Yeah.
to be a manager?
Yeah. That's a really interesting one. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think management is one of my strengths. I think that I'm good at like creating things. I kind of think of myself as a maker. And I don't think management is really a strength for me. Even as I built my company, I had sort of one support employee. They're now growing it beyond that. But I think that's something that I need to grow in. And I think that's probably something that somebody, either has or doesn't. I think it's a natural it's become a natural progression to go from being a developer to being a manager, because you kind of go up the org chart. And I don't know whether that's always a good thing. You've got people that fit into that role really well and take off with it. And then others that I think maybe it's not a fit for. Maybe just staying as a developer, and if you can find a way within your org chart to promote them along a development track, that could work. But yeah, to be honest, I think that's not something I'm that good with,
So you said a couple times about putting things out there, just launching, get it out. Is there anything that you've launched or put out there that you've regretted, and how did you sort of handle that scenario?
There's a couple things we were talking about in the live stream today. There's a couple of random. Regretted. That's such a good way to word it. I thought you were going to say, is there anything you've put out that sucked or whatever? And I was going to say, yeah, there's a lot. And I actually want to do a whole, and actually Phil kind of did this, a talk on all of his failures, of which there are many, he'll tell you. But I wanted to do a talk on all my failures, of things I've put out. And I think that you definitely do regret, in the sense that you look at something you did a few years ago and you go like, that's really cheesy. Like it's legitimately embarrassing. So I think I would say I've regretted things in the sense that I look back at them and I think they're kind of embarrassing. I'm trying to think of the best example that. I'll say one. I built a whole company in between MageMail and Commerce Hero called Good Links, and the idea behind it was, hey, how can I build a company to sort of scale creating a lot of jobs? And I said, what's the best job that you could really scale? And I landed on like link building, like SEO link building, which I knew nothing about. And I kind of got into it, and it was going relatively well. But at some point, I realized like I'm just not into this at all. Like I was into the idea of creating jobs, but the actual work was just I wasn't in. But I don't know if I'd say I regret that. It's one of those things where, even if something's a failure that you put out, I think that, unless you're kind of doing something wrong, something unethical, I think that I'm not sure that I've regretted anything.
Cool. Thank you.
I'm so happy about these questions, man. I was worried. You guys were so quiet during the talk, didn't laugh at any of my jokes.
Hey, so with your
My dad jokes? Yes.
your growth there, it kind of seems to coincide with the launch of the podcast. Was that your finding, or was that just everything kind of happened at the same time?
That's a good question. If you ask Phil, he'll attribute the growth of the entire thing to the podcast. At the time, I really didn't know how much of it came from the podcast. I didn't even think about that. I should look at that. So that's in 2014. Yeah, I'll have to go through. Yeah, so that's really interesting because the podcast is interesting. Every day, I just talked to somebody that said in Poland, they're hearing from merchants that are saying, hey, you got to listen to this podcast. They talk about Magento honestly and stuff like that. And so we continue. I've met somebody in the UAE that heard about it. So I think I underestimated kind of the reach of it, and I think it did have a significant impact. And I think that other things were also happening around that same time. Yeah. Hey, I just realized you're Alex. I was like, who the what's up, man? Yeah, no, I couldn't see. Like, I was like, I know you. Your voice sounded familiar. Yeah, that it's attribution is tricky. It's so tricky. So it's really tough to say, but I think that must have had a gigantic. And then there's the knock-on effects of you're creating a podcast, so you're speaking more in public, and you're talking to more people, so you're getting more comfortable with speaking. And so I think there's a lot there. Thanks, man.
Hey, so I just wanted to say
My man.
I drew a comparison of what you said earlier about not quitting in the first year, and so I just want to put a buzzword on it, is consistency and patience, right? Because you feel the pressure of like the economic crunch while you're doing this, so it makes you want to, do something more and more. But sometimes you got to let the process flow or believe in your vision. So, for you, did you have any people doubting these projects, or people like self-doubt, or some kind of something that told you don't do it or do it?
Totally, yeah, that's such a good question, and I wanted to touch on that more. Everything from, again, like, my wife is just like, why are you spending all this time at night? We just had a kid. Sometimes you do things at like the worst possible time to start something. And so, whether it's from, your family or your friends, or, a lot of times it's not like an overt, like, I'm doubting you. It's just a lack of interest. Like, you're all excited about something, you tell them, and they're like, oh, okay, and that can be really discouraging. And on the other side of it, there's definitely times where the idea just isn't a good fit. Like if you're building a SaaS app for underwater basket weavers, the market's probably not there. So it is a balance between like, hey, is there really something here, and pushing on it. And sometimes sometimes you stop, like the Good Links thing I stopped, and some of these open source projects I stopped. So there definitely are times where one of the hardest things is deciding who to listen to, and because you have to take feedback, you have to take criticism, and you have to use that to steer the direction of the product. But there's also stuff you got to ignore. Like there's also negative feedback that you have to kind of ignore. So I think having that sense of what to listen to, what to pay attention to, and what to not let get you discouraged is kind of one of the big things. Yeah.
Sometimes you have to find out what's driving you to do it. That might not everyone's always just profit. They want to have impact.
Totally. Yeah, and it's funny because I wouldn't I think for a lot of people, you might be happier with a stable job, not the ups and downs of building a product and things like that. And it's not like it's all flowers and roses. Even when you start to make money, it's still not all, you've got a product, that's great. You've got passive income, that's great. But it's never passive. You got to keep building. You got to do support. There's a lot of stress that comes with the ups and downs. So yeah, you got to, sometimes I feel like maybe I'd be happy if I didn't have that itch and I just had a little more stable gig. So you really got to, figure out what you want to do and what's best for you and to go with that.
Do you have any recommendations for the support side of doing like a SaaS product? But because it's fairly different when you've built something and then you're getting tickets and something's broken, particularly with Magento. If you built some sort of extension,
Yeah.
Other extensions break your extension. How do you manage that?
Totally. So I think documentation is a big part of that. So the biggest tip I would give is when you're doing your own support, start to create an FAQ doc. I use Help Scout, which makes it really easy to do. It's searchable and all that kind of stuff. Create an FAQ doc each time you get a question, and then you start to build a nice library of questions. I would even do this. I'd get a question which I didn't have in my FAQ. Instead of emailing the answer, I write the answer in a doc, link them to the doc, and they get it's a different impression that they get. Like, oh my God, I'm going to check the FAQ next time, because some of you in the audience may even happen to you guys. So like doing that, and then once you have that built up, it makes it a lot easier to bring a support person in. And when I hired support, they weren't, there's different directions to take it. You could hire a developer that can do some development and also do some support. I hired a support agent that wasn't a developer, didn't know Magento super well, and they were able to pick it up within about 6 months or so. And so if you have some good documentation, that's helpful there. Thanks, man. My ear's good.
With Good Links, what happened? Like, what made you want to stop it? Because it was a noble thing, and I
Yeah.
was one person who bought into the vision. I thought it was
Yeah.
great. So what was when you said, this is time to call it?
Well, I had a partner that worked with me on that, which was another one of my takeaways from MageMail is that I was working solo, doing things solo, and I think that actually Commerce Hero I'm also partnered. So I think for me that was a lesson that I wanted to have a partner, and there's some pros and cons of that. So my partner at one point decided it wasn't really a fit for him, and so that was kind of tough to deal with, and I had to decide whether I was going to continue to do it. It was just one of those things where, in theory, I thought that I loved the idea of it, and then in practice, I'm like doing link building and stuff, and it's like, what am I doing? I don't know much about this. It's not really in my skill set. But I think we did a pretty decent job. We had some really decent clients and stuff like that, and I'm proud of what we did. But it was just, like the day-to-day of like training people that are a little bit more junior level that you're hiring and training is a whole different skill set. And so in some ways, Commerce Hero has some similar elements in the sense I'm kind of helping people get work, whether it's freelance work or whatever. And so it's interesting how every time you put something out, you learn and you take some elements and they stay with you. Some things you go, that was a bad idea, and you scrap them. But it's interesting how you kind of there's concepts that you're interested in and you see them progress through your life and through your career in different forms and stuff like that. So that's kind of the deal. All set? Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.